I think the party is doing the right thing by focusing on what they did. That's a win. Border
Joe,
incursions.
it's not just Minnesota.
Border incursions
let me
have
tell
went
you
down
what
to
happened.
effectively zero.
Okay,
That's a
let me
win
tell you,
for the
let me tell you
administration.
what happened
Promises made, promises kept.
Let me tell you what happened this week. So in the Rio Grande Valley, congressional district number 15 in Texas, where Donald Trump managed to do an incredible turnaround. He won it 58% plus. This week, they decided to detain an entire family, including 2 young teenage boys, members of a mariachi band.
In today's video, Ana Navarro humiliates Joe Borelli on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as a fiery debate erupts over Republican immigration policies and the growing political fallout from the party's mass deportation agenda. Ana Navarro calls out the backlash among Latino voters and moderates, highlighting the real political risks for Republicans, while Joe Borelli tries to defend the party's messaging and enforcement strategy as tensions rise on the panel. So let's dive in and watch how Ana Navarro shuts down Joe Borelli on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
About mass deportations and instead remind voters that the party stands for deporting criminal undocumented immigrants. The GOP made mass deportations a central part of its 2024 campaign message, but tonight Speaker Mike Johnson is acknowledging that something went wrong along the way.
We got a little hiccup with some of the Hispanic and Latino voters for certain, because some of the immigration enforcement was viewed to be overzealous, and everybody can describe it differently. But here's the good news: we're in a course correction mode right now.
A course correction mode. I was told many times that mass deportations was hugely popular with the American people and that they voted for it, so they want to see it.
That was probably the most honest take you ever see from like a Republican.
You rarely see it. I almost wonder if he knew he was on camera when he said that.
You rarely see that, that directive of a take. Look, no one poll is conclusive, but when you see poll after poll indicate something, it's certainly a trend. And 2 things can be true. The administration ran on closing the border and deporting the worst of the worst, right? Those things are still wildly popular with Americans. The part that isn't is what happened in Minnesota, is where these raids took on a different aura, let's just say, than what people expected. And I think that's where Republicans genuinely did lose vote. I'm not saying that. The polls have been pretty clearly. Yeah. So if you want to compete in the midterms in 2026, I think the party is doing the right thing by focusing on what they did. That's a win. Border
Joe,
incursions.
it's not just Minnesota.
Border incursions
let me
have
tell
went
you
down
what
to
happened.
effectively zero.
Okay,
That's a win for the administration. Promises made, promises kept.
Let me tell you what happened this week. So in the Rio Grande Valley, congressional district number 15 in Texas, where Donald Trump managed to do an incredible turnaround. He won it 58% plus. This week, they decided to detain an entire family, including 2 young teenage boys, members of a mariachi band. In the Rio Grande Valley, mariachi is a varsity sport, a varsity activity. It is huge. It's something that everybody follows and everybody roots for. They're members of Mariachi de Oro. They made a movie about these mariachi bands. Well, they sent them to Dilley Detention Center, wrongly detained this entire family. They have a pending asylum application. There is a very close congressional race going on there. Bobby Pulido against Monica de la Cruz, the Republican. Guess what? They had to release the kids because nobody wants to see kids like those be detained. And we have seen it over and over and over again. Just this last week in Miami, in a place that voted massively for Donald Trump, I heard a Trump supporter crying on TV because his common law wife of 25 years, a Cuban, was deported. And when she went for the immigration check, he said to her, "Don't worry about it. They don't deport Cubans." Guess what? Some of these Cubans are being sent to Sudan and Eswatini, if you know where that is. The woman was, it's in Africa. The woman was detained. Initially, what was on her record is that she had been in a traffic stop 20 years ago, and she had 3 Xanax pills in her purse without prescription. You start deporting every Latino without prescriptions, with tranquilizers, there's going to be nobody left.
That's a different story, right?
For 3 Xanax pills?
Well, I'm just saying, it sounds like that particular person is not the best case.
For 3 Xanax pills?
When the immigration heats up, one thing that often gets lost is how complicated enforcement becomes once policies move from campaign slogans to real life. Many voters say they support removing dangerous criminals from the country, but large-scale enforcement operations can end up affecting people who were never the intended targets. According to research from the American Immigration Council, a large portion of individuals detained in immigration operations have no violent criminal record. In some cases, people picked up during raids are longtime residents with jobs, families, and pending legal cases in the immigration system. That gap between political messaging and real-world outcomes is often what sparks backlash when communities begin seeing neighbors or co-workers suddenly detained. Public opinion also tends to shift quickly when enforcement actions involve families or minor infractions. Polling from the Pew Research Center shows that while many Americans support stronger border security, support drops significantly when policies involve detaining families or individuals with decades-old offenses. When stories involve students, parents, or people with pending asylum claims, those cases spread rapidly through local news and social media. That visibility often reshapes how voters view enforcement policies, especially when the people involved don't match the serious criminal image that many campaign messages focus on. There's also a clear political reality behind these reactions. Latino voters remain one of the fastest growing voting blocs in the United States, particularly in states like Texas and Florida. Political strategists from both parties understand that even small shifts in support within these communities can influence close elections. That's why moments where enforcement appears overly broad can quickly turn into major political flashpoints.
This is a clear turnaround. This is a clear turnaround for the Trump administration because they definitely ran on mass deportations, not just ran on it, but came into the administration on that very agenda. Listen to this.
If the Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country.
The simple part is seal the border, deport all the illegals. No illegals in. Everyone here goes out.
We're going to have the largest deportation in the history of our country.
I think it's interesting that people focus on, well, how do you deport 18 million people? Let's start with 1 million.
We are going to start the largest mass deportation in the history of our country because we have no choice.
It was clearly, once they started doing it, very unpopular. But that was actually clear if you were really paying attention long before this moment. What took them so long?
Well, I think the fundamental problem here is that what the administration has been doing, instead of going after the worst of the worst, as Joe pointed out, which polls like 70, 80% amongst American voters, they decided to go after a ton of other people, which only polls at 50-50. Can you imagine deporting illegals only polls at 50-50 because of the way it's being carried out, because of what happened in Minnesota, because of the masked men? No American wants masked people running around the country, picking up people off the street and throwing them in vans, regardless of whether they're here illegally or illegally. Sure, even if you believe all illegals should be deported, the reality is that deporting violent criminals polls a hell of a lot better. The Republican Party, Mike Johnson's finally figuring that out. It's costing votes amongst not just Latino voters, but a lot of other voters. There are moderate Republicans that are losing, too. This is a huge error, a huge overplay by the administration, and they're learning the lesson of it. By the way, you start killing American citizens in Minnesota, that's a fail.
It's layers.
Lawful gun owners, that's a fail.
Yeah, it's layers of problems for them. And it might be it might actually be too late. The damage may have been done already because even, just to be clear, they're saying don't talk about this, but the policy is functionally the same. Every day there are stories of immigrants with no criminal record being picked up. Last week, a journalist being picked up who has a pending asylum claim and is married to an American citizen, had a pending green card application. So if they talk out of one side of their mouth and then act another way, I don't know if that's going to work.
Yeah, they're in a rock and a hard place because obviously this was the issue that won Trump the election. People cared so much about immigration because we had a porous border. Well, the border closed and independents now are much more focused on affordability and other issues. At the same time, that's the rock. The hard place is that Trump's base is still overwhelmingly supportive of mass deportations. And we've seen that the White House did issue a statement a few hours ago saying nobody is changing the administration's immigration enforcement agenda. And so I think the administration is in a situation now where they could potentially alienate some of the base who wants to see these mass deportations at the same time that independents are growing frustrated.
Yeah, they're going to have to decide if they want to win elections. I mean, I think that's where we're at.
The bigger issue usually comes down to how policy actually plays out beyond campaign slogans. Large-scale deportation efforts are far more complicated than they sound in political messaging. Researchers from the Migration Policy Institute have pointed out that millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States have lived in the country for more than a decade, often with jobs, children in American schools, and strong ties to their communities. Because of that, enforcement operations at a massive scale rarely affect only the serious offenders politicians talk about. In reality, they often include people with minor violations or individuals already involved in legal immigration proceedings. Public opinion data also shows that Americans tend to draw a clear line between targeting violent offenders and broad enforcement that sweeps up families or longtime residents. Surveys from the Pew Research Center consistently find strong support for deporting immigrants convicted of serious crimes, but that support drops when enforcement involves people without criminal records or those with decades-old minor infractions. Once stories about workers, students, or parents being detained begin circulating, the conversation quickly shifts from abstract policy debates to real human consequences that communities can see firsthand. There's also a clear political dimension behind these reactions. Latino voters continue to grow as a share of the electorate, especially in states like Texas and Arizona. Political strategists from both parties understand that even small shifts in support within these communities can influence tight elections. That's why moments where enforcement appears overly aggressive can quickly turn into national political flashpoints.
To build on that, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump were the ones who placed themselves in between the rock and the hard place by using this insane immigration rhetoric. The Department of Homeland Security account posted a few months back that they wanted to deport 100 million Americans. There are 50 million immigrants, both legally and illegally, and then 50 million other people in this country who could be deported by this administration. They want to deport 100 million immigrants. And I just want to say the American people will not forget the images of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy being shot. The American people will not forget the constitutional rights that were trampled on. They won't forget homes being entered with no warrant or people being pushed to the ground because they're simply recording, which is a constitutional right. So this administration is overstepped. Now they're running away from their core policy, but keeping the same position, which is not a good look for them.
I don't know where he's getting the 100 million number.
They said that on the Department of Homeland Security account.
Just to go back to the polling,
Yeah, that was a sort of like a meme post that they posted.
It's not Department of Homeland
I'm just saying
Security.
they did post that number, and it doesn't make any sense.
The issue itself is not polling as ranked high in Americans' views of what's determining the midterms, what's the most important issue facing Americans. That's in part because under Joe Biden, we had this crisis. It was on our TVs every night. It was in our urban areas, right? We were seeing migrant shelters all over this city in particular. The issue has subsided because of the success of the border. So continuing to make the policy about immigration is just not going to have the same impact on the base as it is because it's not as bad of an issue anymore.
I think it's that, plus it is an unpopular issue for Republicans. So it's now being weaponized by the other side. They can not talk about it all they want, but Democrats are going to talk about it because it's actually a motivating issue for a lot of voters who helped put Donald Trump in the White House.
And there's a lot of people in the base who voted for that, but didn't realize that it was going to mean their tias and their abuelas and their girlfriends and their boyfriends and their employees and their friends and their colleagues
being deported. I think that is very true. Everyone, thank you very much.
One thing that often gets overlooked is how enforcement policies collide with legal and constitutional realities. Immigration enforcement in the United States isn't just about political promises. It's bound by due process rules, court oversight, and federal law. Legal scholars frequently point out that even undocumented immigrants still have certain constitutional protections once they are inside the country, including the right to challenge detention and the right to legal proceedings before removal. According to analysis from the American Immigration Council, large-scale enforcement actions can easily raise legal concerns when raids, detentions, or searches appear to bypass standard procedures like warrants or judicial review. Another layer of the issue is how these policies affect public trust in institutions. Law enforcement experts often warn that when communities fear aggressive immigration crackdowns, they become less likely to cooperate with police or report crimes. Research cited by the Brennan Center for Justice suggests that immigrant communities are significantly less likely to contact authorities if they believe routine interactions could lead to detention or deportation. That dynamic can unintentionally make neighborhoods less safe overall because witnesses hesitate to come forward and victims may avoid reporting crimes out of fear that immigration consequences will follow. There's also a clear political dimension shaping the debate. Immigration was one of the most visible national issues during the last election cycle, but polling trends now show that voters are shifting attention toward economic concerns like affordability and wages. Surveys from the Pew Research Center indicate that while border security still matters to many voters, it no longer ranks as the single dominant issue it once was. That shift creates a complicated situation politically because policies designed to energize a core base can simultaneously alienate moderates and independent voters. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.